Hello everyone, I'm here today to give you my judging for the Booktube Prize, and I was judging translated fiction. I don't remember the group name number, but I will put it in the title of this video so that you will know. But yeah, so what I'm going to do is to rank the 6 books I read for the translated fiction category from 6th to 1st. Give you a bit of my reasoning behind that. In 6th place, I have put An Apprenticeship, or The Book of Pleasures by Clarice Lispector, and this is a Brazilian book, and it's basically talking about the love story of these two people. She's a school teacher and he's a philosophy professor in the university, and they have a slightly toxic relationship, I think, and it's just about the feelings and the obsession between those two people, and the feelings that they feel and how it goes back and forth. And this, as far as I know, I think this was written in the 60s, but just recently translated, so it does make sense that some of the tropes that it touches on are quite heterosexual, heteronormative kind of roles for the man and the woman. But I didn't enjoy that. I also thought that the language was quite pretentious, like even the name of the characters are Lori and Ulysses. I don't know, maybe it's a normal names for Brazil, but naming your character Ulysses gives some kind of pretentious feel to it, I feel. And yeah, there is some unnecessary drama and details about the relationship that I didn't need to know. I just, overall, I didn't enjoy the book. I think that it was, there was no point at this point in time for it. It didn't discuss anything important. It didn't... It didn't connect to the characters because it was so pretentious, so for me it didn't work at all, and it's in 6th place. The next book that I read for this and I put in 5th place is 3 o'clock in the morning by Enrico Carofiglio, and this is an Italian translated book, and in this one we follow mostly a young child, teenager, and his parents. His parents are divorced, and when he is a teenager, he has some attack, like a epilepsy attack sort of thing. So they go, his parents go to Marseille with him in France to see what they can do, because apparently there is this very famous expert on the topic in Marseille. So they go there and they spend a couple of days there and see what they can do for him. So he starts taking these pills after that visit, and 3 years later or something like that, he goes again to report on his progress, and the doctor says that he hasn't had any other attacks since then. So he should stop taking the pills, but before he stops taking the pills, he will have to stay without pills for, I think it was 2 days, so 48 hours, without sleeping, to see how he will react under stress, and if he doesn't have any epileptic attack, then he's cured. And apparently this is something that they used to do many years ago. It's an actual test they used to do. And I think this is set in the 80s, although it's not very clear. It could also be now, and say for that test thing. And basically the focus of the book is on those 48 hours that he has to spend without sleeping. He's alone with his father in Marseille, and he hasn't had that much contact with his father because of the separation of his parents. So they talk about a lot of things, and they kind of get to know each other. They also talk about the breakup and what happened between the parents. They talk about life, about what it is to be a teenager and coming of age. And yeah, there are quite a few philosophical ideas. They also talk about jazz and music. So there is like a feeling of these conversations just to touch on topics that the author is interested on and wants to talk about. I felt that I was hoping for the story to be more about the epileptic attacks and what it is to have this disability, because at the beginning, the first quarter of the book or so, it does talk about how there's a stigma, and I really like that part. But once it gets into the 48 hours without sleep, and it's just about these conversations that to me it felt a bit forced, like it doesn't fit into the story really. Like it's just the story is an excuse for these conversations to happen, and I didn't think that worked as well as the author wanted it to work. So for that reason, I have put it in 5th place. I think it's not necessarily a bad book, but it just doesn't succeed in what it's trying to do, because the whole thing feels a little bit forced. The next one I read is The Passenger by Ulrich Alexander Boswitz, and this is translated for the German. And this one is a special one because it was originally written and published in German in 1938, 1939, so before the Second World War. And it follows a Jew, a rich Jew in Germany, mostly Berlin. And it is a time when the Nazis are taking power and they are starting to take the wealth of the Jews and mark them with the stars, but it hasn't, like the whole Holocaust and the whole war hasn't happened yet. And to me it was kind of interesting to read that, knowing that the author didn't know what was going to happen, because we have all, I think, read many World War II books or like Holocaust books, but knowing that the author didn't know about all of that before writing this, and it was just about the moment when he was writing it and what Jews were suffering through that moment without the knowledge of all that came after, it was quite interesting to me. And the book itself basically follows this Jew. His wife is not Jew, so she's kind of safe, but he's trying to save his money and he's trying to get out of the country. So he takes trains all over the place, because as long as he's in a train he feels safe, because if he goes home then the police will come for him. But as long as he's in the move he feels kind of safe, and he looks not Jew, like he is he doesn't have like a big nose, or he's blonde, so he doesn't look like a Jew. So if he doesn't say anything, as long as they don't know who he is, or as long as he doesn't say his name, he feels safe. So we follow him in this crazy train rides all over Germany, back and forth. He goes to the border with Belgium and in Aachen, and the Netherlands, tries to cross, he cannot cross, he goes back to Berlin, he goes back to Hamburg, and it's just like back and forth through the trains. And yeah, I thought it was interesting to read about that part of time from someone that was living that at that time. I think that the story itself it had like a bit of a comical element, and it didn't give that much depth into the thoughts of the characters. Like there was not a huge character development or a huge plot or anything. It was a simple story, but it was effective of what it was trying to do to show the situation of Jews at that time. So that's why I put it in 4th place, because for me it didn't do anything particularly mind-blowing special, but it was fun to read. If what happened to the Jews is fun, like it does have that comical element, and I think he's allowed to have that comical element in part because he doesn't know what came after. So in that sense, it's a little bit different from all other Holocaust books that I have read. And I appreciated that for it, and that's why it's in 4th place. In 3rd place, I put The Republic of False Truth by Ala al-Aswani. And this is from an Egyptian writer, and it's about the revolution, the Spring Revolution in Egypt that kicked Mubarak out of power. And this one, it took me a long time to get into it because it has so many characters and some of them are really not likable. It follows a general that was in favor of Mubarak, and he's very misogynistic and he's very very brutal with the protesters and the leftist people. There is a Christian, there is some Muslims that organize the protests. There is a factory worker that was working on their own revolution within the factory that was owned by Italians. So there's all these different characters. I think there are like 4 or 5, and there are like parts of the book in which we just hear the narrative, and parts of the book in which we see letters that some of the characters send to each other. So yeah, there are a lot of characters, there are a lot of things happening, so for me it did take quite a long time to get into the book, also because, as I said, there were several characters that were quite unlikable. And funny enough, like the general that was misogynistic and crazy has the same last name as the author, which maybe the author was trying to say something with that, I don't know. There was also a very religious Muslim woman that was in charge of the television media that twisted the truth to make it seem as if the regime was doing the right thing and the protesters were violent and crazy. But we also follow some of the protesters, and having all those perspectives does give the book quite a complete a complete view. I think by the end it is very clear where the author stands within the revolution, but at the beginning it wasn't, and it was a bit uncomfortable to read some parts of it, also the misogynistic parts. I know that Egyptian society can sometimes be a little bit misogynistic for Western standards, and there's a lot of talk about women's bodies, which made me quite uncomfortable. And it is kind of typical for a man to write that kind of thing. I don't know if that was intentional for the characters to be portrayed that way, or it was just the author's way of being and non-questioning things. I'm not sure, but those parts were a bit uncomfortable. But there were also parts in which he shows women as powerful and having their own will and fighting for the revolution as anybody else. So in that sense, it's probably just the characters, but it does take a while to get there, and it's very uncomfortable in the middle, and it's not a short book. So in that sense, I didn't particularly connect with it for a long time. However, at the end, the final insight that it gives into the revolution, I think it was valuable. Last year in Invisible Cities, I did watch a documentary about the revolution in Netflix. I don't remember the name. I'll try to put it down if I remember. But I think that those two things combined made me understand the revolution better. If I was going to go for only one of them, I would go for the documentary, so that says something about the book as well, and the documentary gives more information or is more impactful than the book. But overall, I think at the end I was able to appreciate what the book was doing, and the characters are quite complex, even though some of them could, especially the women, could be portrayed in a more nuanced light, but overall I think it was effective at what it was trying to do. It's also shows a part of history in Egypt that is very important, and the writing style was okay. As I said, The different perspectives threw me off at the beginning quite a lot, but once I get used to it, I was okay with that. And it's not, the writing style is not beautiful and special, but it's effective for what it's doing. It's also not particularly impactful emotionally. So yeah, it is a difficult one to talk about, because I think it is an achievement, but I didn't particularly enjoy the whole experience of reading it. So yeah, that's why it's in third place, because I don't really know where to put it, because I think objectively it is a good book, but subjectively I didn't particularly gel with it. In second place I put There Is No Such Thing as an Easy Job by Kikuko Sumura, which was translated by the Japanese, from the Japanese. And this one, again, this one is quite in the longer side, and it's about a woman that was burned out in her previous job. So we see her starting a new job after that burnout, and she asked for a very boring office job that she doesn't really have to do anything about. So she's put in this, it's kind of like a police camera, and she has to watch the footage and see if something happens. So the whole time that she's working, she's just sitting in a desk watching someone go about their day, doing basically nothing special, which you will think it's an easy job, but there turns out that there are some complications with it and with the person that she was watching. So at the end of that, she decides to quit that job and look for another job that is easy. So she goes through mainly 5 jobs that are supposed to be easy jobs, but there's always a catch on them. There's always something that is not quite right, that it's off. So we see her go through these stages of all these jobs, and there is a certain mystery between them. It's almost like short stories, but there is like a thread of this woman being there, but also there is this things that are slightly off. And it is quite, I think, quite characteristic of Japanese literature to have this sort of magical realism bias, even if nothing magical is actually happening. It's like a mystery, but you're more likely to believe that it's made by fairies than an actual person, even if at the end it's an actual person that does it. You know what I mean? Like it's that kind of vibe. So yeah, it has 5 different stories that are connected with each other almost, and by the end we see what she actually wants in a job and what happened with her old job and all of that. And yeah, basically the point is, like, you actually know work is always hard, and there is always something that is going to not be ideal. And yeah, I thought that this one was at some points, like, I enjoyed the stories in themselves, but at some point I couldn't see the connections, and I was kind of thinking it's the same thing over and over again. Like, this woman starts the job, and then she starts liking it at the beginning, and then something goes wrong, and then she quits, and then she gets another job, and that happens several times. So by the 3rd job I was thinking, why are we reading over and over this thing? Like, it all seems kind of the same, even if the job is slightly different. But by the end it does make sense. So it does require patience, but I think that it is fun in a way. Like, it's on the lighter side, but still has some depth to it and to the conversation. It has some clever bits into it, like some clever things that it comments on, and some clever connections that happen. So yeah, overall I enjoyed it, but on the other hand, I don't know how much I'm going to remember this in the long run. The book that I put in first place was my clear winner for this round, and that was My Heart by Semeddin Mehmedinovic. It is about a man in his 50s that went from Sarajevo to the US, fleeing the war basically, and It is divided in 3 parts. The first part is about him and his relationship with himself and with his fleeing from the country, but also with he has a heart condition and his relationship with that heart condition. And it's kind of told in a kind way to himself, and also it has a few illustrations around which I didn't know and I really appreciated. Then the second chapter is about his relationship with his son, and the last part is his relationship with his wife, and I believe that was the longest part. And also the fact that she got ill because of a stroke, so he kind of had to take care of her at some point, and that relationship, how it flourished. And it's very kind, but it's also doesn't shy away from discussing the war and the things that happened in Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, and the Balkans during the 90s. And it's just very human and very touching and emotional without being soapy. And it does have a bigger conversation about those kind of wars. And I think, especially now with what's happening to Ukraine, I think that it is very relevant to read about these war stories in Europe, which they happened like 20-30 years ago, so it's not that long ago. It feels to us like there was never wars in Europe after the Second World War, but that's of course not the case. So I did find it very enlightening and very human and very touching, and I think it's great. The writing style is very particular as well. There are many parts that are written in second person, like addressing the important people in this man's life. And yeah, I really enjoyed how it was told, and I enjoyed the heart that the book had. That's why it's called My Heart. So yeah, those are my rankings. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have judged the Booktube Prize, what your books were and what your rankings were. And also let me know if you have read any of these books and you enjoyed it, or if you are planning to read any of these books. And the next video, bye!